So I finally played the original Fallout from 1998, and it was a pretty good game. I was pretty nervous playing an RPG like this because I've heard so many people say these old school RPGs are so hard and they don't hold your hand. However, my experience wasn't really that bad with this game. It was pretty straightforward once I knew what I was doing, of course, and it only took a bit of experimenting to get a hold of things. My playthrough took me around 14 hours, so my weekend was eaten up and well spent. I will say I was a little bit disappointed after finishing Fallout because a lot of what I had been expecting just wasn't there. Some of it was gameplay and story related, but most of it was the hype and anticipation from VideoS's claiming Fallout was the ultimate RPG. It's good, don't get me wrong, I just had my expectations set to an impossibly high standard due to YouTubers. Thanks. Assholes. This also isn't going to be a super in-depth review or retrospective, just a quick talk about my experiences and thoughts on a classic game. Anyways, let's get this started, shall we? Fallout's story is incredibly straightforward. Vault 13's water chip is broken and they cannot purify their own water. The Overseer sends your character, a Vault Dweller, to find a new chip before the water reserves run dry in 150 days. After finding and returning with the water chip, the Overseer sends the Vault Dweller on a suicide mission to destroy the mutant army that's been gathering. The main quest is pretty straightforward, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Some of the most celebrated pieces of pop fiction tend to be pretty straightforward plots with simple and interesting characters. Now, as far as interesting characters go, they're all fine. Killian and Gizmo's conflict, while a side quest, stems from Killian's desire for law and order and Gizmo's desire to turn Junktown into a prosperous gambling town. This little conflict has no right or wrong answer, as whoever you side with tends to stem from your own political worldview. Support the uptight lawman or scummy businessman, it's all up to you. And the way this conflict is introduced is well done. I walk into Killian's store looking for hints on where to go next, and boom! I'm caught up in a gunfight between the mayor and Gizmo's hitmen. Next thing I know, I'm working with Killian to take down Gizmo by getting him to confess his crimes in a microphone. It's great, plain and simple. That's just one example of how this game's story works. Look for hints on where to go and uncover a new conflict that is organically introduced on your quest. It's just great game design. Now, are those characters deep? Not particularly, but they don't need to be deep to serve the quest's main purpose. You might have noticed I also mentioned having to ask for hints on where to go next, and that's because Fallout doesn't really tell you where to go. Sure, the start of the game shows you a vault, but that's a dead end. You have to use your brain and go around town asking for a water chip or nearby towns that might have one. For my first playthrough, I had a random event with a scavenger on the world map. Now, I had heard about this place called Necropolis, a location I haven't seen yet, so I asked him about it and he marked it on my map. So I headed to this new area, and lo and behold, that's where I was supposed to go. Now that singular moment made me feel so damn smart. I found the water chip on my own accord by traversing the world and engaging with NPCs. Little moments like that are sprinkled all through Fallout, and having to use my brain and actually engage with the game felt so damn good. I wish more modern RPGs did this sort of thing. And while I do generally like this game, I do have a few issues with the game's story and the world. First probably being the lack of follower quests. Now, this is more my expectations from the Fallout series rather than the game's own fault. So if you're unaware, Fallout New Vegas and Fallout 4 have affinity points for the game's followers. Once reaching a certain point, the followers would open up to the player character, introducing a new conflict and quest to resolve those underlying issues. So for example, Boone opens up about his wife and his participation in the Bitter Springs massacre. While the quest is simple, Boone's character is changed. The stone cold facade is dropped for a moment and he opens himself up to the courier. He trusts the courier more, and that change in character, while subtle, is shown through this interaction. Fallout, on the other hand, has nothing like that. Ian, Katya, and Tycho— I actually don't know how to say that. Is that Katya? Katya? Katya, Ian, Tycho, they're all pretty flat characters. I'd even say they're all boring. None of them really have any character. Like, yeah, they have backstories, with Tycho's being pretty detailed, but there isn't really much more character after that. I guess Katya hates— Katya? Her name's right there. She hates dogs. It's something. Better writing than Skyrim. I really wanted more out of the followers in this game, and unfortunately Fallout does not deliver in that category. The world itself is pretty small. I did say before that bigger isn't always better, but I do want more areas to explore at my own pace. Fallout has the Glow, the Brotherhood of Steel base, and the Raider camp. 3 extra areas, with the Glow being more of a traditional RPG dungeon, and that's it. I do like the glow, don't get me wrong, I just want more side areas like this to explore. I know Fallout's quest isn't about exploring the wasteland, and it's meant to feel urgent, but that doesn't mean I don't want to explore and experience the world more. I want more side locations that are built more like traditional dungeons. Is that too much to ask? Maybe it is. Again, this isn't a major issue with the game's world, this is more my own personal gripe towards the game. Like I said, the story and world is relatively well designed, interesting quests and locations. I'm just being greedy, I'll admit it. I'm being a big old gizmo. Now my last complaint with the story has to be more with the military base. It sucks. For my first playthrough I did the military base last because I thought I got softlocked and had to actually look up how to get in. I messed up the radio sequence and I didn't think to loot the mutant with the actual code, so I got locked out. Now I did find out, thanks to the internet, that I could use an electronic lockpick and wear a purple robe from the cathedral to get in. Yeah, I know, I missed the code, failed the speech check, it's my fault, I get it, but the fact that the code despawned and didn't stay on the ground like the laser rifle or the grenade the mutants had just sucks. Oh yeah, Katya couldn't lockpick it because she got her skull caved in by a mutant with a super sludge during the raid on the Master's Cathedral. I think it's the military base where the lack of direction is sort of an issue. How do you get through these barriers? Well, you see, you just take this here radio you definitely didn't loot and sold as junk item, and then you take it to the computer, successfully hack the computer, then flip the radio sequency on, plug it into the computer, and then every time you call the radio, you can turn off the yellow barriers to progress. Okay, how was I supposed to know that? Oh, right, the strategy guide. Yeah, no, I gotcha. Now, I understand using the radio to trick the mutants into opening the gates, but using it on the computer to control the barriers is kinda too cryptic.
Actually, you can just use your repair skill to get around the barriers.
True, until you fail the repair skill roll and have to save scum. And if you don't save scum, you're probably fucked. I don't know, I save scummed, so I didn't actually check to see if I was fucked. I might be wrong in this, and that's fine, I just save scummed it. And speaking of save scummed, if you failed the science roll in the computer, you would get locked out. So if you fuck up the hack with the radio, you just get locked out and you can't move the barriers that way. From my first experience, I kind of think Mariposa military base just kind of sucks ass. The use of the radio, the failure on skill rolls, and the reliance on save scumming just screams bad design. And I get it, it's a symptom of 1990s game design, different era, different design choices, I get it. While I found the writing and world design to be pretty good, I still have my own personal gripes with it, like the lack of character quests and side locations. It's good and fondly remembered for how organic the world introduces story beats and conflict to the player. I cannot deny that. And I will not stop complaining about the military base because
And you have to leave.
the gameplay is pretty basic for this. Nothing terribly complex. You've got your basic stats and skills, you level your character up to build them the way you want. Movement is as simple and precise as point and click to walk, cameras and isometric, and there's a sneak option that is just the same as walking, but sneakier. As far as combat, the game has a variety of guns and equipment to help take down all the mutants you could ever want to kill. They're more or less the same aside from stats. Click on the enemy, roll the dice to see if you hit, and depending on your character's skills, your chances will go up or down. Accuracy is dictated by positioning, so if you're 3 tiles away with a combat shotgun, you're going to hit more of your shots than if you were, say, 6 tiles away. There were also melee weapons in this game that I really didn't use, like why would I pick a knife up over a 44 Magnum? Like, seriously. I'm not running at this guy with a fucking knife, get the hell out of here. Now, I've heard a lot of people say Fallout is a hard game, and I kind of disagree. I think what makes this game difficult is the lack of a proper tutorial on the mechanics of the game. Old RPGs and games sort of just threw you to the wind and expected you to either figure it out or read the manual or fucking die. And guess who has 2 thumbs and didn't read the digital manual? Not me, because the Yakuza took my left thumb after the accident and... never mind. I kind of figured things out as I went, resulting in me dying in the starting cave with the rats. I can understand why people would be confused and say the game is difficult, as I kind of ran into a few problems at the start as well. But once I figured out how combat worked and got better gear, things were much smoother. I actually didn't know you could right-click to select reload in the middle of combat until about 4 hours into the game. So for those first 4 hours, I was opening up the inventory and dragging ammo to my gun to reload. I also didn't realize you could just heal from the inventory, so I was constantly opening up the menu, dragging stim packs into my equipment slot, and using it. And for those who don't know, opening the inventory in battle costs 4 action points, and I only had 8. So I couldn't actually shoot if I had to reload or heal that turn. I ended up taking Quick Pockets perk, which also reduces AP for the cost of the inventory. But if I had known better when building my character, I would have gone with something better suited for combat. And speaking of building characters, it is incredibly easy to fuck up a character build. I didn't fuck my build up at least, but I heard from a friend that he had to restart after messing up his build. And hearing stuff like that actually scared me and made me think this is going to be some super difficult, scary game. But once you get past the difficulty curve, it becomes much, much easier. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still died and all, but that's kind of the natural thing that occurs in a probability-based game. For the love of God, do not take Jinxed. If you decide to play this game, do not start with this trait. You will actually find yourself in RNG hell. I am not kidding. And speaking of RNG hell, I think that's where a large portion of the difficulty comes from. Missing that life-saving 85% shot can be infuriating. I understand probability and know it's not a perfect shot, but when you miss those rolls, my mental well-being is utterly destroyed. And the random enemy crits, dear God, the enemy crits. By the end of the game, the super mutants were easily one of the scariest things in this game because I swear to God, they always high roll on their crits, and when they roll a critical hit, it is game over. I'm not joking when I say I genuinely fear a super mutant with a plasma rifle. Every single time I engaged with one in combat, someone would get hit with a critical that would do well over 150 damage. And it was me. The random numbers do not guarantee anything, and that uncertainty makes this somewhat a pain in the ass at times. Genuine question, but what is the counterplay to a super mutant rolling a critical hit with a plasma rifle? That's the neat part. There is none. No, I'm just being a shitter. There's really no counterplay to RNG, and sometimes you just get one shot despite being in the best armor and literally playing perfectly. Not that I play perfectly or anything, it's just, let's just say hypothetically I was. It is a little unfair and aggravating, but that's kind of why I like RNG based games. The highs are immense and the lows can be absolutely soul crushing. I really wouldn't consider RNG a bad thing, as the whole point is to adapt to the new situation when the dice doesn't roll in your favor, which is where the skill comes from. Or, you know, you could just save scum. That works too. I'll also say I think this game has some bad balancing. Like, agility is way better than any of the other special stats in this game. 10 agility grants 10 AP, which means I can fire my gun twice, doubling my damage. And then there's Gifted, which boosts all stats by 1, but you lose 10% of your skill points, which is completely worth it. Gifted is easily one of the best starting perks in my opinion. The gambling and trap skills feel pretty useless when compared to something like Repair or Science or Small Guns. The only place I encountered traps was the military base, but with having so few levels to work with, I'd rather put skill points into something more combat oriented just to survive. I ended up just literally tanking every single trap. And speaking of tanking everything, I think power armor is just a tad too broken. Seriously, every single enemy aside from the mutants just became a joke once they got power armor. But even then, they were mostly easily dealt with because I could just tank and heal constantly. Now, I'm not saying the gameplay is bad or anything. I think for the most part, it's plain and simple. These are just some of the issues I take with it. Yeah, balancing is a little wonky, sure, but again, that doesn't ruin the experience. It's a solid game for what it's worth. Overall, I think Fallout shines through its story and world design. Again, I cannot emphasize this enough. The game has such a naturalistic approach to how quests and story beats are delivered to the player. I think more modern RPGs need to take note and adapt this into their design so their games can feel less artificial. I'd rather be in a shop and suddenly have the shopkeeper pull out a gun and shoot a guy, forcing me to get involved, or just watch him get blown up, rather than, say, watching a cinematic cutscene where I don't have any sort of agency. I will say I'm disappointed by the lack of character quests and the more complex moral dilemmas in later games like Fallout 3 and New Vegas. Yeah, I know, I just praised Fallout 3 for having some interesting moral dilemmas. They've got like 2. The one with the pit when you kidnap the baby, and Harold the Mutant. Individual autonomy versus the community's needs and desires. Yeah, I know. The gameplay is where I'm kind of mixed. Enemies have insanely high critical damage at the end of the game, which makes it impossible to even adapt to the situation because you're fucking dead. The endgame leaves somewhat of a sour taste in my mouth, and more specifically the military base. I also think the AP driven combat puts way too much value on agility, making it more valuable than, say, charisma or intelligence. And again, some skills just don't seem worth investing in. I didn't really mention it, but the lack of control over followers also kind of sucks. They do their own thing in combat, and if you're Katya, you just walk up and get one shot by a fucking mutant. And I had to kill Tycho at the end of the game because he blocked the doorway during the escape sequence at the military base, and somehow Ian survived the whole fucking game. I can safely say there are some things I wanted in the game that would have added to the experience, but that doesn't really bring down Fallout in a major way. Like I said, I think I might have just set my own expectations too high because of what I've heard, which again, isn't the game's fault. Fallout is a really solid game with a few minor issues, and I'd recommend it to anyone who's into RPGs. Now personally, I prefer New Vegas, but I still think Fallout 1 is good. So yeah, solid video game, 7 out of 10, too much desert. Yeah, no, that IGN guy will never live that down. I don't care how old that is, it'll never be not funny to me. Anyways, what are your thoughts on Fallout? What's your favorite Fallout game? Don't say 3 or Brotherhood of Steel. Anyways, thanks for watching this far, and you guys have a good day or night. Bye.